Things are going to start happening to me now.
You've done all the reading. You're a scholar. You're a professor. You've done all the reading. You've done the intellectual heavy lifting.
More or less, eat shit and die.
You wouldn't know a fact if it begged you all night long.
Want to give the wrong impression because I am very high.
Ran up behind him with a hatchet. Smash, smash, smash. Yeah.
Care. I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is,
did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Who?
Joe Jorgensen. That was the perfect answer. Thank you.
Happy New Year, everybody. This is Tyler Yonke, Libertarian Podcast Review. I'm doing a pre-recorded show, so when you're watching this, I've already done it. Why am I doing that? I don't know. This is a long one, and I didn't know that I wanted to subject myself to your comments, live comments, and deal with it. Actually, not the comments so much. It's going to be a long one. I don't know if I can, if I'm going to actually have to edit it, maybe step out if something happens. So that's just kind of what I'm doing here. Anyway, hope everyone had a good New Year's. We did a Christmas watch along. I hope you checked that out. That was fun. Should have done a podcast of the year type of episode. You know, everyone always does those things. I don't know. I've gotten really busy. Family stuff going on. We've got family drama. I don't want to get into that too much, but you know, teenage kids can be problematic. So I hope you don't have to go through those problems. But here we are. So Michael Knowles. Who's Michael Knowles? Michael Knowles was on. Well, Tyler. Who was he? He's a conservative commentator for the Daily Wire. He, Ben Shapiro's network. He's a conservative guy. I've enjoyed him, but he's very straight-laced conservative. And he recently went on TimCast, and when he did so, he pissed off a lot of libertarians. So he did a kind of a victim blaming. I thought it was an odd thing. And look, we're seeing this a lot lately. Right-wingers are taking on libertarians. They're blaming them for their ills. I've made jokes about that recently, about Tucker Carlson saying, oh, it's those libertarians and their economics in the government that have really caused the problems. And you're like, the what? Which ones? Now Michael Knowles isn't making a distinction of economics or social policy, but I think he means more social policy. But when he takes on some of these things, you tend to go, oh, you're straw manning it. He doesn't know what maybe hasn't really talked to a libertarian before. That's why I'm going to start this with an interview he did last year with Michael Malice when Malice's Anarchist Handbook came out. And we're going to start. This is why this is going to be long, because I'm going to play all the stuff he talks specifically about the libertarian stuff and anarchist stuff on TimCast. But before then, I'm going to play some Michael Malice interview with him because he knows better and he's a very smart guy. I'm not going to even pretend to be as smart as him. He's more well-read. We're smart in our own areas. Like I said, I don't dislike him, but I think it's disingenuous, and that's where we're going to kind of lay some of this out. He's Catholic. Okay. So that has to bring in some of this because, I don't agree with Catholicism at all. Matter of fact, if you read the book of Revelation, perhaps you think that Catholics are the bad guys. Just there's those interpretations out there. That's all I'm saying with that. But I think that has something, that's not all Catholics, not all religions, of course, but I think that has something to do with it. You see this trad Catholicism kind of working its way around, and their way is the highway, or their way or the highway. And if you're a Catholic, it's no big deal. I'm just saying, are you this way? And by the way, I'm religious, and I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, but I'm definitely not telling you that my way. I preach to you if you want to hear about it, but it's going to be a voluntary interaction. It's just like dating people. Grace wins and love wins. Of course, there's more to it than that. But what I'm saying is you can't force, and you can, and it's not going to work out well, force someone to love you, to follow a philosophy they like or a pathway. And I think Michael Knowles wants to do that in his soul. So we're going to talk about that. So, and one other thing to kind of keep in mind here, because Luke Rudkowski pushes back to him. That's who he really has the conversation with on the TimCast. And Luke uses some of the Malice comments, such as conservatism is just progressivism driving the speed limit. And Michael Knowles seems to kind of acknowledge that and be pissed off that he's not able to drive faster than the speed limit with with his political party, which is frightening. Okay, a lot of the things he says are frightening. So why don't we start this off here? This is Michael Knowles interviewing Michael Malice. We're gonna take some clips in dips in here. Hope all this, we're gonna do 1.25 speed. This is him. Michael Knowles reacts to anarchy and the white pill. Michael Malice.
The door hit you on the way out. But you're saying from your perspective, the collapse of trust in these institutions is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I don't think things like the Ivy League and the state are redeemable, the New York Times, elements like that. And I think what conservatives fail to appreciate is that these institutions have been this way for a very long time. There's an argument in conservative circles that, Hollywood's been taken over by the liberals, but at the same time, conservatives do appreciate that Ronald Reagan was president of the Screen Actors Guild. And as president of the Screen Actors Guild and previously, he was very concerned by the depths of literal communism, not just communism, Stalinism within Hollywood. So at what point wasn't Hollywood a venue of the very hard left? In the 20s, when they didn't have talkies? Well, yes, I guess if you can't talk, you can't spread leftist ideas. But I mean, Woodrow Wilson is another great example. He was a college professor, the first college professor who became president. He was president in 1912, and he was advocating things far to the left of what even Bernie Sanders would advocate for today. So I think conservatives, by and large, are supposed to learn the lessons from history, but unfortunately, that seems to not be the case very often. And this is why it's a big reason for optimism in the future. Woodrow Wilson is a far more nefarious foe, far more talented individual, far more charismatic than what, AOC? I mean, there's just no comparison in my opinion.
But there.
Okay, and I thought that's important because Michael Knowles brings up the past. He brings up exactly the things that Michael Malice is saying here. And look, when you're interviewing someone, and it's not so much that he doesn't maybe push back, which he does. Maybe he doesn't push back quite, whatever. If he's not debating Michael Malice, that's my point. But that's not my request for having you check this portion out. What this is he's been introduced to some of the best arguments around. Okay, so when he goes on TimCast and now he acts like those aren't arguments and he strawmans all day, you can see that he's not a dumb guy. He will quote people obscure till the cows come home. So what he won't do is remember conversations he had of people showing him better arguments. I think that's what it is. So, okay, as I'm yapping along here, what we need to do is just bring in the next one. So he just kind of continues on from the same vein, and I've got different clips here, so keep going.
This sense among the old right, I mean, these terms old right and new right, they change every 20 years because you get new people and older, but of what we would call the old right in, say, the 50s, they really were concerned with getting rid of the New Deal. They were fighting against FDR, they were fighting against Wilsonianism, and then that just kind of went away. And, over the ensuing decades, the conservatives just gave up. They kind of made their peace with the New Deal. In some ways, they adopted a Wilsonian view, at least a foreign policy. And so, that...
Keep that in mind. The GOP, the conservatives gave up and they adopted something else. Because later on, his whole premise is it's the libertarian influence that caused these problems.
That, to me, speaks to the absolute entrenchment of these sort of leftist progressive policies. You think, though, maybe they're not so entrenched? Maybe we can upend them?
Oh, they are entrenched, but let's talk exactly what we're talking about. In the 1950s, you had the nomination was between Dwight Eisenhower, who no one knew what his political resume was at all. Both the Democrats and Republicans tried to recruit him. He was a great war hero. And the Republicans had Mr. Republican Robert Taft, who was a conservative Republican. Taft got his ass handed to him, partly because of liberal Republicans like New York State Governor Thomas Dewey, who ran against FDR twice, who was a Romney Republican before the term existed. They later called them Rockefeller Republicans. So I think this idea that the Republican Party has historically been a venue for shrinking the state is really kind of an ahistorical fairy tale along the lines of the 1619 Project. When push comes to shove, they've never really cut budgets at all. The other example to that was 1964 with Barry Goldwater, of course, who's a great conservative hero, and he got his butt handed to him in that election, which of course presaged the Reagan election in 1980. But the relationship between conservative ideas or limited government ideas and the Republican parties is far more nuanced than I think a lot of people appreciate.
True, and actually going back all the way to the founding of the Republican Party, let's not forget, right?
Okay, so he says that's true. By the way, he contradicts this exact stuff later on. He makes arguments against this exact same thing. So played.
Abraham Lincoln ran on tariffs. I mean, the party was anti-slavery, pro-protectionism. So that's not exactly a small government policy. And, even after, I don't think anyone would call Abraham Lincoln a small government sort of president. The guy suspended habeas corpus, rightly, I think, but still he did it. And so.
Okay, so rightly, habeas corpus. So that blows me away. Maybe he's meaning only in that specific circumstance. But here's habeas corpus. I wrote this down so we'd all make sure we have it. It's the right to petition a writ of habeas corpus has nonetheless long been celebrated as the most efficient safeguard of the liberty of the subject. The jurist Albert Van Dicey wrote that the British Habeas Corpus Act, quote, declares no principle and define no rights, but they are, for all practical purposes, worth 100 constitutional articles guaranteeing individual liberty. It's basically unlawful detainment, imprisonment to the court. Your chance to petition this. So I don't know. he likes it. Once again, he thinks it's good, and I'm glad he's out here with this. That the idea of an authoritarian person taking control is perfectly fine to him. Once again, because Abraham Lincoln, who that's maybe a touchy subject to think about, but he wasn't all that great. Okay, let's keep going here.
Your answer to this is a very naughty word. Anarchism. Freedom.
Yeah, that's what I just said. Freedom. Yeah.
Well, now, so I think we've agreed basically on everything thus far, but now I think we're going to disagree. What made you come to identify as an anarchist? How would you define anarchism? This is notoriously difficult to define, and people have lots of different definitions for it. And what does it mean practically if we said, okay, enough of our political system, we're going all in for anarchy, baby?
Sure. So anarchism can be defined in one sentence: you do not speak for me. Everything else is simply application of the concept. It is the idea that political authority is inherently illegitimate, and just because a law is passed does not give you any moral impetus to respect or follow it in any respect. It also means that when you look at the Republicans and Democrats, you're looking at literally two different gangs who are fighting for turf war, neither of which have your interest at heart. So the black flag is the traditional symbol of anarchism, and I have the expression, the black flag comes in many colors. So the reason I wrote this anarchist handbook is it's different anarchist thinkers from the last 200 years explaining what anarchism means to them and how it applies. In terms of what that would mean right now, it would mean things like an increased skepticism of the police, because they are the ones who are forcing you in your home. They're the ones who are enforcing gun control laws and every other edict that Gretchen Whitmer, Mario Cuomo, and Gavin Newsom put into place. It is having an increased skepticism of concentrations of power, whether it would be Jeff Bezos, the Ivy Leagues, or the.
It's interesting how Michael Malice is talking to him from the right, which is like, hey, you might not appreciate. Here's why it's important, because this is how it's going to be detrimental. But maybe when you listen to it later, maybe Michael Knowles would rather you talk to him from the left, which is, hey, when you get in power, you can fuck people over too. I don't know.
Or the federal government as well as state governments. And understanding that this idea of, well, you and I disagree, but I'm going to respect your opinion. When the person disagreeing with you is a politician and have the ability to enforce their views upon your family, you are under no obligation to take them seriously for 1 second, and you should instead regard them with an enormous amount of contempt. Let's take the gun control issue for a second. A politician sits forward and says, I'm going to make it harder for you to get a gun to protect your home and your family. That's not a time for debate. That's a declaration of war, and everything else proceeds accordingly.
Typically, historically, anarchism is more associated with the left than the right. In some ways, it's associated on the right. But generally speaking, a lot of the people who developed anarchism as a political theory some of them were communists, some of them associated with communists, are trying to work things out in the 19th and 20th centuries. So how is it that you, a right-winger, quite firmly on the right, how do you reconcile that this movement that came largely from the left is now the movement you'd identify with?
Well, I don't know that I would call myself firmly on the right, but I think also this is an example of when labels and binary thinking fault people. The biggest criticism of Marx, and I include the essay in my book, was by Mikhail Bakunin. He was Marx's rival for the early kind of leadership of what would become communism. But in 1867, 50 years before the Soviet Union existed, he was predicting what it would look like and why it would be an enormous disaster. Emma Goldman, who was deported by Woodrow Wilson and J. Edgar Hoover to the Soviet Union, she wrote a book in the early 20s denouncing how bad the Soviet Union was and warning the left that this is even worse than the Tsar and this is not what we're for. So you mentioned Orwell as well earlier. Historically, the strongest opponents of the totalitarian state have been these leftist anarchists, because they realize, guys, and they're arguing from leftist principles. This is not what we're about. So we have to have respect. And there's also in America, there have been many, Truman certainly did his job taking on communism as well. There have been many people who would be on the left who have historically been very skeptical of the state and certainly the totalitarian state.
Now, in America, when anarchists have come to prominence, they tend to be terrorists. They tend either.
I'm no terrorist.
You might be the one exception. No, there are obviously exceptions.
Okay, and I'm going to keep going there because Malice basically says I'm not for it, and that's kind of the difference. And once again, he's pushing back and talking about the left side, the left. And I think, and by the way, I'm going to play a clip here of Keith Knight later on talking to the one and only Dave Smith, and he kind of breaks that down. He does a great example of while they were the first to embrace anarchy, it doesn't mean they were correct when they did so. Okay. One more clip here, and then we'll go to his.
You've got anarchism, which, as you say, is basically incompatible with Christianity. Though there are some exceptions.
I did not say that at all.
Did you not? I thought you said. I thought you said that if you're a believing Christian who believes.
No.
Romans 13.
I said if you believe those specific aspects of Christianity, that you have to obey your rulers, and that these rulers are basically God sent, that is not compatible.
But if you're a Christian, you believe that the Bible is inerrant, unless you're a heretic like Leo Tolstoy or someone else.
Well, I mean, I would think Tolstoy would regard you as the heretic here. So
but he's wrong. It's the problem. I mean,
neither of us will ever be as great a man as Tolstoy. I think it's fair to say.
I think we're both much better men than Leo Tolstoy. By the way, he was a degenerate. He was a very good writer, but he was an absolute degenerate of a human being.
Well, in all fairness, you and I both did hit the #1 nonfiction book in Amazon, which I don't think he ever did. So in one sense, we are better writers than Tolstoy.
Yes, no, that is true. And Tolstoy, he needed all of those words to write. I mean, God, that book goes on. And at least my first book didn't need a single word at all. So I think, so then you got Tolstoy aside, but let's say you've got now on the new right, you've got anarchists.
By the way, let me just say, Michael Knowles wrote, I think it was a bestseller. It's like 250 pages. And the book was titled something like All the Great Things About the Democrats. And it was literally like 250 pages, blank page, just completely blank pages. Brilliant troll. He's not a bad guy, but this has to be done, people.
Such as yourself and other people, and maybe some followers of Ayn Rand or, kind of from that wing. Then you've got traditional, just knuckle dragging to the right of Genghis Khan conservatives that I would place myself in that camp. Throne and altar, theocratic, fascist, I don't know, whatever term they want to use.
Yeah.
Then you've got, today on foreign policy, I don't even know what would constitute a conservative. My question is practical.
Exactly.
Is it the Bush era thing? I don't think it's that. Is it the non-interventionist? Yeah. So how do you get enough people together to unite that? Because, for all of the many faults that Bill Buckley had as he was trying to build this coalition, he did manage to bring people together and win at least a couple of elections. How can we do that now with all these disparate factions on the right?
So I don't think that it's a numbers game.
Okay, I'm not going to go down that. So I just wanted to lay out that he's got a good handle. This is an hour worth conversation that he goes, and by the way, you can see how deep he goes. So now when we hit the big stuff here, over there, pointing over there, when we do this, we're going to see a little bit of a, by the way, I've got an ammo, just like Tim does, so do I. I've got an ammo box. I know what that has to do with check ship. I got to get one like that. It says Tyler on it, maybe. So now we're going to talk. So you're going to be able to see how does he know what he's talking about? Is he strawmanning everything? And let's go there.
Don't care at all. So, I don't want to hear this. Well, we thought Elon was going to be the free speech absolutist, and now he's suspending. No, I didn't. I don't know. I'm not a free speech absolutist. I believe in standards and norms. And
okay. By the way, I'm going to play almost every second of him on TimCast arguing with Luke about libertarians and philosophy. Okay, so just stick
what I really believe in? Banning these left-wing losers. And I really believe, especially banning that guy who was tracking Elon's plane. That guy's gone. Right. But the rest of them too. I see absolutely no reason for Elon Musk to tolerate them remaining.
By the way, I'm not. If we take the Twitter files out of this, and you're just talking about like what can a company do, ban people. Okay, I guess that's what it is. But we're seeing with the Twitter files that all these bannings that took place. Some of them, the request of Trump, but it's mostly they just showed the last one. I mean, your Russian disinformation for whatever it was. It was crazy from all aspects of government. So anyway, we'll continue on.
How do you define free speech?
Well, I define free speech as I define free speech, I suppose, as the founding fathers might have defined free speech, which is, or even as John Locke, the father of liberalism, might have defined free speech, which is not totally free. Which is, yes, we have broad toleration for lots of different things, but there are limits, and they're pretty severe limits. I mean, let's not forget, we're not only talking about speech acts like fraud or direct threats or obscenity or things like that. A lot of people don't even think of obscenity these days as something not protected by free speech, but I would go further than that, all right? Yes, it's true that the libs have speech codes, but chivalry is a speech code too, you know, and I'm all for chivalry. I'm all for banning people who are degrading our society. I mean,
that's not a speech code, but that's social speech codes, but it's not First Amendment hate speech or what have you. I know there are people out there that have called Michael Knowles hate speech, right? What things he says, all kinds of things. I'm sure they do because they disagree with him, and they probably truly believe it. And of course, as we're going to dictate through all of this here, is it can be turned against you as it has over and over in the last 20 years. And for me, many more years behind that. But he's young, so maybe he doesn't know, although he can read, and he does. He's well-versed in history, so you know it goes way back, and it flip-flops. One party comes in power, and they use it against the other one, and then the other one comes in power, and they use those same laws against each other, except for the people in power, and it's Trump. So anyway.
You know, just as a matter of historical fact, speech earlier on in American history was much more restricted in certain ways than it is right now. We had blasphemy laws for much of American history.
Laws. I say that's true, and yet they had to turn Jefferson and some of these other ones that they called them muckrakers. They were horrible. I mean, I think it was Adams and Jefferson used to go at each other and basically say that they're like syphilitic and just ridden with diseases. They were pretty harsh. But yes, there was some speech code there
and obscenity. We still have obscenity laws on the books. They just don't enforce them. Now, in fact, now they only enforce it if you have wholesome speech. If you speak obscenely, then you get to do it.
That's why I say culture is more important, because we got a ton of laws on the books they started ignoring.
Personally, I disagree, because who do you decide who's degrading society with what ideas? I think if there's bad ideas,
with your reason. I
mean, sorry, I'm going to try not to stop everything so much, but Luke's exactly right, because he just mentioned how obscenity laws aren't there unless you're saying something good, which he gets to define what good is.
And your moral conscience and tradition.
Yeah, but who's going to be calling the shots here? I think that's important here. Exactly. And power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
But someone's going to have it.
But when it comes to bad ideas, they need to be challenged with good ideas. I think we need open debate. I think we need open conversation. And I'm very curious to see what happened here. And I'm more skeptical because I believe at the end of the day, even though we might not agree with each other, I still rather have that conversation rather than say, I just only want to hear myself.
Do we need to have a conversation about the virtues of child pornography? Do we need to have that debate? That's a debate.
By the way, this is the problem he has every single time, and it's technically straw manning, which is instead of just discussing having a yay as an example of Nazis and whatnot, can we discuss that and have debates here? He goes right to pedophiles, the most extreme. Later on, he talks about kicking a baby. This is akin to, and I wonder if you do this, Michael Knowles, of how you feel about people talking about only want to argue abortion rights, arguing the rape and incest. I'm going to dictate everything on rape and incest. Let's go right to that one rather than everything else that you can possibly talk about. It has to be the most extreme, and I get it. That it helps get you to the point and helps clarify things, but it's also a little bit disingenuous here.
We really need to have.
That is one issue that obviously I stand with you on.
But I know you stand with me on child pornography.
Obviously,
but do you think we need to have the debate? In the free marketplace. I don't think we do. I think
if there's idiots out there, right, who do believe in certain, which there is, right?
Yeah.
I do
Why do we
believe
have to entertain them?
They deserve to be challenged. They deserve to be pushed back.
They deserve
because
it's just to the most. He's correct. However, there's nothing wrong with having a conversation and hashing out ideas of, because you can go to, next thing you know, you're talking about the Romeo and Juliet type of laws, and there are nuances even with those kind of things or whatever. But so,
but again, if you push people away, just like you do with the censorship that's been happening, you push people to more radicalized corners of the internet, and they double down on their ideas rather than having a whole bunch of people telling them, hey, this is wrong and not acceptable here. Right. By pushing them away, they won't have that kind of pushback in their life, and they're like, okay, I'm just going to hang around other,
I'm also curious if it's just that he says it should be like outlawed, that you even have this discussion, because the acts I understand, but what about just like they're talking about it right now. So should that be outlawed? And that's essentially what he's basically
CD people and think this is okay when it's not.
I actually would agree with you, Michael, on this one.
Okay.
I see Luke's point, but I think it can be refined. Like, there's a reason why we publicly denounce. There's a reason why you're saying right now we don't need to have a debate. It's settled.
We
it's done.
figured it out. Yeah.
But
That's
that
one issue. But that's not an
Science
issue.
is
No, for
settled,
sure.
Michael.
And that means that there will come a time when you need to explain to someone who maybe says, well, people should be allowed to have their opinions. And you can be like, look, there are some things that are so morally reprehensible that it's universally despised among most human beings. And, you know, we will tell you why it's bad.
I mean, this was William F. Buckley Jr., who's credited as the founder of the mainstream post-war conservative movement, as urbane and open-minded a fellow as ever there was. He had a debate on his show with a neoconservative, Leo Chern. And Chern said, we need to have the open society and the free marketplace of ideas. And Bill Buckley said, you know, I actually think we can close society off a little bit. Yes, we discuss lots of things, but he said, I'm an epistemological optimist. I think that certain things are settled and we don't really need to entertain Nazis or communists.
Your political opponents are doing the same exact thing you're doing in Europe, arresting people for saying that men can't be lesbian.
Well, look, I think Nazism and communism are horrible, right? The concepts. But if they're happening, literally happening around, you've got to be able to talk about them, right? And if someone's going to try to, they just had, what was the loser that had debated Gene Epstein at the forum? I think he was just on Lex Fridman. He's trying to push socialism again. Sometimes, and like this, I think Michael's ideas are horrible. And so we're going to air them because one, we want to grift off of them. And then two, I think they speak for
they're using the
themselves.
same justifications and arguments you are. And this is why I think it's a slippery slope.
They're saying using the same procedures, but the substance of what they were doing is the opposite.
They're saying, I know what's best for society. I know what ideas are good or bad.
Right,
we have to stop these ideas. We have to stop right-wing ideas.
But there's a
Therefore,
difference.
if you hurt people with your ideas, we have to stop you, censor you, and throw you in jail.
But look, the difference is that there's a difference between good and bad. So if I'm the CEO of Twitter and I'm determining what the standards and norms are.
I mean, you know, for the most part, I probably agree with him on most. I mean, look, I have kind of a sweater thing on. He's wearing a sweater. I'm a white Christian. We've got a lot in common. I probably believe it, the same, but good God, I don't want him, just like a lot of the Andrew Popular Liberty and some of these other losers, I don't want them making decisions for me. That's my life. And I don't want, and I know cultural norms and blah, blah, blah. But you're going to have problems if you live in this guy's house. He's going to be much different to you. And you're going to hear about some of these things than what your life might be. And you don't want me dictating your life either.
Good, true, and beautiful things, and I discourage ugly, false, and wicked things. That's not the same thing as what the libs do.
But that's based off your interpretation, because for them, what's beautiful is like a drag queen, right? That's beautiful for them. But Luke, that's your interpretation.
But they're wrong is the thing. And so we have faculties of reason and moral conscience, and we can perceive the world and come to fairly reliable conclusions.
Let me just make a point here. We like to believe that the world is logical, that we can set forth a set of rules that say you cannot do X, Y, and Z. And then what we discover is the interpretations of X, Y, and Z vary wildly, and we actually struggle to operate. Humans struggle to operate on a moral, logical level. In that, if you come out and say, don't be mean, don't be bad, don't hurt somebody, and then someone says, okay, well, insulting you is my opinion, I'm not hurting, and then someone else interprets it as hurting, we see there's an issue there. My view is I err towards mostly free speech. I agree with you on things like child porn. I think there's probably things we can say, do not advocate for something like that, right?
Yeah.
If you're
Here's what we all have to understand, though. What he's saying when he says, advocating or doing this, good and evil, he's not talking about you personally. He's talking about a government. I don't want them advocating anything. Okay, I know he thinks you could use the bully pulpit. I used to believe these things a lot myself. It distorts. And do you want Trump? Do you want Biden? Their views going out there, because that's what happens.
Advocating for that on the platform, we can restrict you or shut you down or something like this. The issue is, and I'll throw it back to the law, we have a bunch of laws in the books. Legally, you cannot do, but they don't enforce anymore because our culture changed, which means there is a centralized morality that societies are willing to tolerate. That means we don't tolerate advocacy for child porn, and there's no reason to open up tolerance to it. We just don't tolerate it.
Well, increasingly, I don't know. Balenciaga.
No, I know. And that's the issue. So my pushback for you a little bit is there will be a debate whether you want it or not, because people will start pushing.
But I suppose the conservative view from the past 20 years is politics is downstream of culture. So stop passing laws. It's really just a libertarian view, but stop passing laws and just, make better music or something. And I'm not really mocking it. Obviously, the culture matters a great deal, but you can't neatly separate these things. And the law is a teacher. So if I'm looking... at how we got to this insane cultural position now, where we will be debating the virtues of child pornography and pedos. It's already happening.
It's happening. They're accusing anybody who criticizes actual pedophiles. They go, why?
By the way, he's probably right about law teaches, right? But that's such a problem of assuming that morality comes from the law. And later on, he's going to talk about, okay, so you pass a law. He's in favor of it. And then next, he's going to talk about how you should have been against gay marriage, which is now law. And, a lot of reasons they push for gay marriage was so that they being, gay people that want that, it's justified. So if you're against it, you're actually against something that the state has sanctioned. And I don't think the state should be sanctioning any of those kind of things, your marriage and personally. Anyway, we'll keep going on here.
You're talking about gay people.
But we got here.
It's like you just mentioned
but
it.
we got here because of censorship, because of people saying you can't counter this. No. We got here because those ideas haven't been able to be challenged because people have been censored for going against them.
Luke,
people have been arrested for going against them.
Why? When we had a more censor-minded regime that censored bad things and promoted good things, as opposed to what we have now, which is a censorship regime that promotes bad things and suppresses good things.
Like what's that?
Yeah, but when is that? And what is good? Define it.
Well, I would say, let's see, the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620. And then from 1620 up through the founding of the American nation, up through about, the early 60s, we had a basic consensus on what is moral and what is immoral, and it was Christianity. It was based on the Christian moral view. And then in the 1960s, you saw, led by the government, led by Supreme Court decisions, led by laws that weakened some of the censorship regime. You saw
I thought he was just saying that we needed the libertarians have led us astray by saying don't pass laws. Okay, we just had that. Now he's blaming the laws. Right. The attacks on McCarthyism in the House Un-American Activities Committee. You saw the free speech movement at Berkeley that led to a weakening of our obscenity laws. You saw a weakening of our laws proscribing certain sexual behaviors that then led to the sexual revolution. When you opened up that society much more, what happened? Did it lead to this wonderful period of flourishing? No, the society's gone downhill. It's gone straight to pot ever since.
But the dads used to beat the moms relentlessly. That was like they just didn't talk about it.
Did that happen?
Well, Sean Connery talked about how he would smack women around and on TV and
society. But bad men beat their wives today, and so it just seems to me what you're suggesting is this very progressive view that the past was terrible and the present was great.
Ian does what I think he joins in here because he's like, oh, this is what we do. We pick the most extreme argument and then we go with it. And Michael's like, hey, easy. I'm not talking, because someone else is doing it.
It was just accepted. Now that we're able to have...
I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true.
I mean, since the dawn of man, the guy is like, fall in line or face the consequences.
But is your argument, Ian, that in the past, the past was basically made up of these knuckle-dragging troglodyte men abusing their wives, and ever since we had the sexual revolution, now that doesn't happen? That just seems like a very progressive, fantastical point of view.
I think it was the internet, or it was really television and radio that broke the censorship mode. Whether we wanted it or not, the technology made us look at ourselves and be like, well, that's what we are. We need to deal with this, but that's not cool.
But just really quick, deciding what's good and deciding what's bad is arbitrary. Depends for who, depends for what society, depends for what individuals in there. But at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, the government's sitting there and saying, Dr. Fauci's there, and he's like, at the end of the day, it's good for society if we censor all these other scientists and we let our doctrine through. So therefore, we need to censor this speech. We need to limit free speech. We need to ban accounts. And essentially, that's what I see you calling for.
So here's where I see where we're at. I err towards free speech, allow people to express their political views to be debated, but I think there's a little bit more limits than many of the anarchists and libertarians would be willing to entertain. And the reason I've come to this position, where I used to just be like, well, maybe you can say whatever you want, is because the system, as it's being laid out right now by you, in your view, Luke, allows the left to say whatever they want, while weaponizing that to silence anyone who opposes them. Meanwhile, you're standing there saying, well, they're allowed to do it. I guess I'm banned and they're not.
Absolutely not. No. The idea of banning speech is what created this exact society. And that's why these larger virtues and ideas need to be pushed back on.
What I'm saying is they are cheating and you're playing fair and you're losing because of it.
Also, Luke, what society doesn't have taboos? In what society is everything perfectly open? I mean, that's never existed on Earth.
By the way, you're correct, and this is it can still happen without a government, but you want the government to set what those taboos are. I get it, because you can't control your own family.
You're right about that, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive towards
something that's impossible.
No, towards respecting speech and debating ideas.
Let's bring us back to the core story.
By the way, that's a dumb comment there, Michael, because you're religious, you're a Catholic, and you always try to strive towards perfection. Which we are never going to achieve, but it doesn't mean that you don't still have ideals that you work for and you try to be the best you can. Okay, so if not, then just say fuck it and let's just go on with our whatever. Okay, 35 minutes in.
And My position, because I think this argument just go forever, but I think if we can bring this back to the story, Elon Musk needs to set clearly defined parameters for what he wants, but then we also need judges to interpret. In the United States, we have laws, but laws can be challenged and judges interpret the law. So when when a legislative body says you can't do X, someone says, well, hold on, X could also include Y. And then a judge says, good question. I'll give you my ruling tomorrow. The judge then looks at the law, looks at the precedent, hears the arguments, and then issues his judgment. The law is not just if yes, then, if one, then Y, if two, then it is humans trying their best to interpret. The easiest way to put it is analog. It's not digital. It's a wave, not a point. That's
great.
Which means that means we want it to be, there's free speech, we respect this, but then when you actually start looking into it, you're like, oh, hold on. Now we're getting into the advocacy for child porn part from the left.
What he's saying is there's nuance, and it's not just, there's not a checklist, not a schematic that you come through. So Michael Knowles agreed. Let's see how he does with that agreement going forward.
At a certain point, we're like, it may not be a call for violence, but are we going to tolerate that level of advocacy?
That analogy, it's the analog, not the digital. Where it's not just, the law is not just a bunch of letters that self-interpret on a sheet of paper, but it involves a human aspect. And what this raises, this interpretive question, I think undercuts what you're saying about good and bad, because you said that good and bad are just arbitrary, but you don't believe that. Nobody believes that.
It depends on who decides it, and it depends who's in power.
But it's just, that's also binary.
Let me ask you one question. Is it better to cook a pie for a widow than it is to
cilantro
kick a baby?
is good. You have to eat cilantro because I decided so, because I'm in power. That's essentially what...
But look, just answer this question. Is it better to cook a pie for a widow or to kick a baby in the head?
What kind of hypothetical question are you even asking me?
It seems like a simple one to me. Can you really not answer that question?
Obviously.
So does that go against his, like I said, that falls in line with the most extreme examples, abortion for incest and rape. So therefore, it's if you don't for that, you're for incest and rape, and that's not analog, right? Is he trying to prove that
it's the pie made of poison? What's the context here?
I'm not Paul Pelosi here, okay?
But it just shows the absurdity of what you said, which is we all know that it's better, even if she's allergic, it's still better to cook the pie for the widow than it is to kick the baby in the head.
What's the pie made of? Is the pie made of
lamb and mashed potatoes? Good shepherd's pie, peas and carrots. But we all know that
a Marina Abrovimich pie.
Is it a Brover? I don't even know.
Marina Abrovimich, the stuff you're cooking?
Well, that would be a bad pie. But even the fact
there are some universal truths, obviously.
Yes. So good and bad are not arbitrary.
But when it comes to positions of power, that is usually blurred. Obviously, whenever you give power, that power usually is being used against other individuals. So when we have people who have a lot of responsibility, if you give them more power and authority, that's not checked, that's not counted, especially when it comes to speech. It leads to very tremendously horrible situations throughout recorded human history. And when you give someone power to censor criticism of themselves, we have seen the largest human atrocities because of that. But again, this is a debate that's kind of sidetracking our conversation. We could agree to disagree. I respect your opinions. I think you made some good points as well. And I think this is an idea. Maybe we could even debate afterwards, because I know we still got a crap ton of stories to talk about.
I want to talk about the Barstool stuff, but I'll just reiterate on the because maybe we'll talk in the members only. We'll go nuts with it. I want to believe in free speech. I want to say, make your points and we'll argue it. But then I also recognize we live in a world of cultural morality. We grew up. We have the roots of our parents. We have the legacy, the things that work to make humanity survive. We've retained and we've shaved off the bad over a long period of time. Look, slavery is not acceptable anymore. Humans used it for a long time. The better parts have stayed with us. I'd like to believe that we can write down, if A, then B, if X, then Y, but humans just don't operate that way.
I mean, humanity thought slavery and the Holocaust was a great idea. They went along with it, right?
Not a lot of people.
It was a good thing, but then it was challenged, and because it was challenged, because people said, hey, this is not okay, hey, this is wrong.
It was challenged with bombs.
Right,
and guns.
Of course.
And not with speech.
But it started with speech. And
is that good or bad?
World War II, the Allied front in World War II did not begin with speech. It began with airplanes and guns.
No. Obviously, there was weaponry, but obviously what led up to it was a bunch of meetings, a bunch of talks, a bunch of escalations, a bunch of things that were related to trade, were related to embargo. So it was a slow.
Chamberlain spoke and Churchill shot. Right.
The reason the left holds the position they do is their argument is that Hitler was allowed to hold his rallies and to indoctrinate and to expand, and he was not sufficiently opposed. And his rhetoric was winning people over because of their desperation. He was basically exploiting their grievances to trick them into the psychotic ideology.
He was also suppressing people he didn't agree with. He had control of the media.
No, that's afterwards. How did he rise to the point where he could do that? He manipulated and exploited people's emotions, their grievances over World War I and
once again,
France, things like that, the poor economy. He gave them things they wanted and then twisted that into his
This is why we have to restrict
It's also
speech.
worth remembering because everyone always makes World War II comparisons. It's like the only thing that anyone's ever read.
Stalin.
No, yeah, but the thing that's important to remember before we get too down the rabbit hole of thinking we live in the time in the 1930s or 20s or something, Weimar Germany
was completely destroyed. You know, money was worthless. Mothers and daughters were holding prostitution teams together.
They were doing
like
trans
that degree of desperation is you know, not akin to something we're seeing now. But the libs exploit this, and they say, well, you know, we're just always living in the lead up to Hitler.
We got to put a tack in it. We got to put a tack in it.
It's about Kanye.
We've been going for like.
All right, we're going to do it later. No.
I'm sorry, man.
No, that's a good comment.
Okay, and he is not wrong. And Pete, what's his name? Pete Substack. Pete. We used to be free. Why Quinones? Jesus, he did a breakdown with Justin Campbell talking about Nazi Germany and them destroying all these books and you know that had done for people that were coming in there and doing trans surgeries and just ridiculous stuff. And so they came in and destroyed a bunch of things. At least I think that's what it was. And his point was, you know, look, I get you didn't like that. They didn't like that society. And so the Nazis were kind of cleaning that up in a sense, but you destroy it. Now you don't get a point out unless, you know, obscurely that this stuff was happening. So, okay, we'll keep going on here because it gets worse in my opinion. It's frustrating at this time, but whatever.
If a cop wrongly enters your home, you could legally defend yourself.
I think Ohio did too.
I think it was Indiana. Yeah. I saw Michael Malice tweeting about this, celebrating it.
Really?
He was very happy.
Malice.
I'm gonna look it up right now.
That's amazing.
Because you know, me and Malice are both anarchists, just so you understand where we're coming from.
Yeah,
so that
listen.
could explain the debate we're having, which is great and awesome.
Well, I'll tell you too. I was saying this to Malice. I was saying this to some of my more kind of Ayn Randy friends because I don't like Ayn Rand. I went through a phase when I was a teenager. Really, I hate Ayn Rand. But the more that I live through COVID and post-COVID, the more that I see, I don't know, I'm going to wind up an anarchist. Somehow I'm going to wind up a trad anarchist, I think. Because, you know, now, this is why it's also Dave's fault. If you are still conducting business in New York or LA, that's your fault. You had plenty of time to get out. You get out, like there's no reason to stay there.
Hey, forcing your will onto other people isn't cool. Being a statist and authoritarian is not cool.
Well, yeah, except for sometimes. Yeah.
No.
Keep pooping in your water supply.
See, this is where I differ with also, you know, the anarchists and libertarian friends of the show is that I look at jurisdiction, right? I've had the libertarians argue no borders. Borders are imaginary. Anarchists, borders are imaginary. And I was like, how do you protect your family if you don't set a perimeter to where you're allowed to live peacefully? Like, jurisdiction is actually setting a limitation on yourself. I actually feel that arguing for no borders is an extension of your authority over others.
Right.
When the United States says, this is our southern border, we're not going to go over there. Well, we do anyway. But the idea is, this is my property line. I'm not going to go over by you. This is where I'm going to do my thing. Please leave me alone. If we said borders don't matter, you're basically saying at any point I can go over by you and do what I need to do.
Well, and also that's just an expression of the false anthropology at the heart of anarchism and libertarianism.
You guys are straw manning this.
Yes,
I just want to say for the record here, and it's far more complicated because.
And by the way, this is how he strawmans it. And here, let me just break this down real quick. If you're talking about anarchy, right, which is basically a stateless society, you are now talking about private property. If you think an anarchist, right-leaning anarchist, does not believe in property rights, you're mistaken. And you just had, Michael, an hour conversation with Michael Malice, who could break all these things down for you. And if you read his book, you can understand. You understood a lot of these things. So you're going to now subject anarchy to a state. And by the way, we're not there. So what do you do? Well, me personally, I'm more on the Dave Smith idea here, and Luke is going to get to it, which is you're still I override everything with property rights. Homeless issues do we have here? If you were enforcing property rights, it would be a much better situation. Same with that in immigration. I'm sorry, but until you are able to eliminate the state, we're going to have some sort of property rights, and we're going to have borders. I know a lot of the libertarians don't like that, but I think that actually works well because you've got to live in the real world. And by the way, I always keep wanting to have Nick Gillespie on. He said he's going to come on. I was going to play him some clips, which is one. There's two clips from the DNC. They had a debate, and they asked him first a question about universal health care, and they said actually the U.S. should cover anybody, illegal or not. Okay, so basically they're like, and then they later on do like a poll question to everybody in there, and they all say should have open borders. Open borders, and you take care of everybody in the world. You know how many people are in China? This is a problem. That is unattainable. So once again, there's the problems, and this is the straw man thing I think you're trying to deal with. You're mixing two different concepts.
We could get into details like welfare and welfare incentivizing people to move over. We could talk about the weaponization of immigration. And I think the Mises Caucus, especially under Dave Smith, has been addressing this issue in a very smart and correct way, addressing this immigration issue in a more correct way, saying, hey, as long as we have the welfare state, we shouldn't have open immigration.
But if you got rid of the welfare state, then borders should be erased or something. I mean,
well, it depends. It's a complicated argument, and there's many different factors that are multifaceted here. To me, anarchism, it's not an all-end solution to everything. It's never going to be perfect, but I think as humanity, we should always be striving for personal responsibility and for personal freedom and liberty.
And I agree to a great extent. My concern is the Communist Party of China exists. They've exerted authoritarian control over their people to the extent where they're welding them into their homes. We can be the anarchists of free trade and all that. And when the Chinese Communist Party comes knocking and says, we'd like to purchase some land in free trade, and we say, sounds good to us, then before we know it, they own 40% of the farmland on the West Coast. And then all of a sudden, they're using that against us, cutting off supply lines. We're being attacked from within, which means I'd love for there, you look at the United States, and Ron Paul made a great point that I love, where he said, in the U.S., you can be a socialist. Go buy land, go set up your little socialist commune. Why do you want to force everyone else to do that? We set the boundaries, we set the rules, we agree on those rules, and then we can live in peace and harmony.
We're also discussing these things as though they're opposites, when they're communism and anarchism, when in fact they're two sides of the same coin, because
I don't
they
agree.
partake of the same false anthropology, which says the fundamental political institution is the individual, which is not true and has never been true. The fundamental political unit is the family, and so people are not...
Okay, I've listened to this part several times, and I've tried to figure out what it is. And maybe it's because I don't know enough Marx to really get this, and maybe, once again, that's why I played the Milo stuff, because I don't think he takes a leftist point of view there. We're all about being able to make contracts, the individual. How does this manifest itself, the family, as he's going to talk about here? How does that manifest itself if you're going to have all these rules? Do you only, is it salvation by family? Dad does something wrong, the whole family suffers. Daughter goes out and steals, now the whole family suffers. Do you have civil rights based on this? That's because you're mixing, and maybe you need to explain it a little better, but you don't want to have individual rights. You want to have family rights. Okay.
Not born, as the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment rationalists would have you believe, as individuals with a bunch of rights and entitlements, but primarily, though we do have rights, but we are born not as these atoms floating through space, but into families with duties and obligations. And so your love of your state and your love of your country is an extension of that filial piety, because you have an obligation to respect your father and mother.
Because you said so.
I think centralization is a big problem throughout human history. I think
that's a different
decentralization.
If I was born into Russia, I would have to honor and respect. So that's what you're saying about all those people over there. They're invading Ukraine. You might think that's a bad thing, Michael Knowles, but it's an extension of their family. Therefore, they are obligated to go with this, right? Or is this only a U.S. policy?
Essentially, this is what kind of boils down. But again, we're getting into larger ideologies.
But it's a balance of the two. You can't have authoritarianism or pure anarchy. You can't have pure either of the two extremes.
I think right now it's more than fair to say that we are more centralized than ever, and we need more decentralization.
By the way, I'm sorry I keep stopping here, but it's frustrating how you'd think Michael Knowles would be limited government, and to bleed into the anarchist and the libertarian state, you are going to have less and less government, right? So you can have a little bit more and more freedom. That he works for PragerU. Prager's pretty, what's the word? Famous for saying something like more government or less government equals more freedom, something along the lines of that. So you can understand it's on a scale. So at some point, Prager doesn't want you to have freedom, and that's what Knowles is basically saying here too. So okay, let's keep going. Okay, but kind of another point here is, I think the ease. So water flows to the point of the least resistance. Circuits do that in electricity too, and I kind of think that's the way you it's more complicated to get a more and more centralized society, a top-down, restrictive, which Knowles wants more than Luke. So I think it's easier going to Luke's way, where you're just dealing with each other on an individual basis, less and less restrictive. That's a better way to go. At some point, I would like it stateless. I don't think that's ever going to happen, obviously, but I'm not necessarily pushing back against trying to pushing against freedom too. Those people that want more freedom than me, I'm not having a battle with them, right?
And this is what the philosophy of anarchism is pushing, because right now I think it's fair to say that too many people in the central government have too much power over everyone else, and we need to limit that power.
And this is where we agree. And I think when you look at the political compass, the least populated portion of it is the center-left liberal. It's either far left, moderate authoritarian to very authoritarian, and then you have moderate conservative to like libertarian right. Yeah. And then you actually, I would argue, have more authoritarian right-wingers than you actually have center-left liberal libertarian types. It just doesn't exist.
I'm center left lib.
But most people who
We're gonna
claim
say
to be
Michael's
are
center
literally not. Most people claim to be are authoritarian left, want speech policing to an extreme degree.
I was just told that that's what I was when I took the test.
But
I don't know what I am.
this is the point.
But Knowles just said he wanted speech police. So where is he at?
The point is, if you are on the libertarian spectrum of the political compass, you still have a degree of authority that you expect to exist, unless you're all the way on the bottom at anarchy.
Listen, we talked about this before. On a local small level, I forgot who said this. Someone more smarter than me said this. On a local family level, you should be communists. And then on a community level, you should be socialists. And then on a state level, you should move away further from centralization and call for more decentralization. And I agree. The family unit, I think, is one of the most important units. But I think we also have to respect the strongest minority of them all, and that's the individual.
Yes.
And you could still do that while, of course, prioritizing families, communities, and neighborhoods and individuals coming together to work together without any kind of mafioso central control or government bureaucrat coming in and getting a cut of the money.
No, but the trads love subsidiarity. I mean, that's a principle of, put forward by Thomas Aquinas and by conservatives since time immemorial. I think the place we're getting confused is we're pretending that individualism, the anarchists and the communists are opposites when they both accept the same fundamental premise, which I think is a wrong premise, which is that the individual is the primary unit of society. And so the anarchists say it's the individual and it has to remain that way, and the communists say it's the individual and that's why we've got to lump them all together. But it's the conservatives who are offering the only genuine alternative, which says, no, it's actually not about this individualism. It doesn't just come down to the individual. It comes down to something that is more institutional and actually fundamental to your humanity, which is family and community and tradition, and not just the use of your individual unfettered reason to come up with some cockamamie idea. It's why I think Karl Marx, if he were alive today, would be in the Tea Party or something.
I absolutely disagree with that in its total essence. And when we look at essentially what is boiling down to what a lot of these larger parties and ideas, especially when it comes to conservatives and what they're doing, they're essentially just kind of the liberals 10 years from now. When you look at the policies, when you look at them deciding to use...
Okay, he just used the Michael Malice 10 years from now. And listen to, remember Knowles was shaking his head. He went back to the 1960, well, where did he go? 20s with Wilson, and he agreed with Malice, and he said, I'm in agreement with everything you're saying here. So now let's see what he says.
Force and government against other individuals to impose their ideas. I think at the end of the day, this is the key central role when anarchists and libertarians don't want a central figure, don't want someone telling them what to do. And I think this notion of back and forth, the government is good, they're going to tell us what to do right, do they have the ultimate decision making and what is good and bad? I think that pendulum is, when it swings back and forth between the left and right, is only bringing on more government, more authoritarianism, and I think we need a lot less of that
Luke,
right now.
do you not see the irony of lamenting that the wicked conservative authoritarians want to impose their views and use the power of the state on you, when what you are advocating is you're saying what we need to do, Michael, is we need to get rid of our political order in the United States, we need to get rid of tradition, we need to get rid of borders, we need to get rid of all these things. What you are suggesting is a radical upending of our political order, at the very least. You're not saying we're living in an anarchist utopia already.
No.
And by the way, I will push back because I don't believe the natural state is utopia. Okay, and that's what and Luke is going to say it here. And Michael Malice says that we don't. You're not eliminating all the problems. You still have all kinds of problems. You still have hierarchy. You still can have lots. What we're saying though is stop ruling over me and stop telling me what is best for me. So there's a difference there. And Michael obviously tries to straw man and put words in Luke's mouth.
Fair to put words in my mouth.
I'm just trying to figure out what you're saying.
I strongly believe in families. I think they should be prioritized, and I think individuals should treat families in a kind of communistic way on the individual basis without any kind of force or government intervening in that. This is why I'm a huge proponent of homeschooling. This is why I'm a huge proponent of moving away from depending on government for daily life.
What if the families are
personal
abusive?
responsibility?
What if the families abuse kids?
That's a horrible situation that needs to be mitigated
by the government.
That's a very hard decision. That's one example that is very hard to deal with.
Is he advocating for CPS?
You're making.
I mean, someone who has to deal with CPS on a constant basis. My preaching to my clients is always the following. I'm like, CPS can save your kids' lives or it can ruin them and yours. So it's a touch and go situation. It's a social worker making a decision about your life. It kind of sucks. And yes, I understand that there's definitely bad situations in this world, and it's not an easy one. This is right. But let me tell you what. Is Michael Knowles saying that right now we are in an exact perfect situation with CPS and children being injured, going to drag shows and such? Is he claiming that right now? Because I'm not saying, I mean, that's the problem. He argues the status quo when, I don't know, maybe it would be better. Maybe we would have a way that society deals with it better. Who knows?
You're making this very niche kind of argument, but I could say, what about the government and the FBI raping small children?
Let's
and bringing them to small islands.
Let's keep the conversation in line and not go far off. What if the government determines that not vaccinating your kids is abuse?
Right.
So the challenges that we have, and that point right there is why I say morality is not logical. Morality is amorphous. It's an analog. It's not digital. We say something like, you shouldn't be allowed to abuse your kids. If a guy is beating his child, we should intervene and stop that. Yeah. And then someone else says, you're right. And if you're not giving the kid the appropriate medical treatment for their disease, that's abuse. And then you ask the question, which medical treatment? Right. Are we talking about a vegan mom who's not giving her son any meat, and because she's determined what's right for her kids, and then we intervene? Or are we talking about, say, a gender transition program where the government says it's abuse if you don't give it to them? There's not a one-for-one answer.
The only, and I agree with that, of course. The only point I'm trying to make is that I find libertarianism and anarchism to be extremely authoritarian, in as much as they seek to impose a political order on me that I think is absurd and that I don't want. I don't want to live in a political order in which I, in a self-government, cannot, through my representatives and through the police force, take a child out of an abusive home.
And by the way, that's his one goal. If his child in abusive homes were his thing, I would maybe understand. If he was Eliza Blue, as an example, and all he talks about nonstop is, sexual, what is it called? Trafficking, sexual trafficking, and whatever. And now he's saying it's this libertarian anarchist society is not going to take care of that, and that's why I'm against it. I'm like, okay, you're a one issue thing guy, but this is not this is not what you're concerned about on a daily basis. But you're trying to bring it up now. And once again, that's a status quo type of situation. Is it any better under your situation? And by the way, you can create that. Tim just mentioned how Ron Paul mentioned you can build your own little commune. You can have your own socialist society. No one is stopping you from do that in this anarchist utopia, as you call it, society. You can do whatever the F you want. You can create that where you, in your community, make sure kids go to mass every day, that they're only diddled by priests. Okay? Jesus.
Libertarian or an anarchist might prefer that, but that's not what I want, so I find it very authoritarian.
But you would rather have a government and support a government and pay taxes to a government that's running international trafficking organizations.
Come on.
If he's making an argument saying I support, but I can make the same argument there. I'm not.
No, I never said that.
Here's the ideal. The ideal is if a guy punches a kid in the face, we protect that kid and get it away from that person. If a guy's beating his wife, we get his wife out of there. But then there's a simple challenge. The law says you shall not cause physical harm to your children or your spouse, be it male or female. And then we say that's a fine law. You cannot physically harm. And then someone goes, this woman was giving her kid an all-soy diet with no protein, and he's sickly, anemic, and about to die. We sort of have... Do we intervene in that regard? But the mother says, I know what's right for my kid. Then we say, okay, you're right. She's abusing the kid. Then someone says, oh, but the government, Dr. Fauci says this vaccine has to be for kids, and the parent won't do it. Should the government then intervene? It's the same law,
right? And so,
but interpreted in different scenarios.
Traditionally, the American response to this is that we have a self-government. And to your point, Luke, very often it does not appear that we actually have a self-government, increasingly. But notionally, that's the idea, at least. And so, within this self-government, we have the right as citizens to come to answers on these questions and say, the all-soy diet, that is abusive. You're not allowed to do that. The vaccine, no, we're not going to make you vaccinate your kids. And that's particular, but that does mean that we have the right to impose our views of the world on others. That is the premise and prerequisite of self-government. If you do...
Okay, so that happened over COVID. Someone was imposing their self-views, which they thought was for the good, on you, Michael Knowles. How did you feel about it? Did you just say, well, I've got a family and my rights come from my family, therefore what?
Then... Well, you'll have to impose some other political order, which will get you right back to the same problem.
Possibly. Let me ask you, Luke, if a kid had strep throat, bacterial, and the doctor said, we're going to, I don't know what the actual treatment is, amoxicillin, do they still do amoxicillin?
Yeah, I guess.
And the mother says, no, I don't want any point on weird stuff. Do you think the government should intervene or just let the kid die?
Pendulum swings. It's always going to be against you at some point.
So again, hypotheticals are not my favorite. I don't think it's fair to even issue a lot of those kind of hypotheticals.
Well, come on. Hold on there a minute. Answer the question. Don't try and patter your way out of it.
I'm not pattering my way. I'm addressing the situation. I don't think it's a fair question. Now, obviously,
how's it not a fair question? A kid has a very simply curable bacterial infection, and the mom doesn't want to give him medicine. Should the government intervene?
At this instant, in this current situation, the government will intervene.
But no, should the intervene?
I don't have all the answers.
This is the challenge. When I start thinking about how, yes, I want to be much more libertarian. I don't like vaccine mandates.
Yep.
And when we say something like, look, I've had when I was.
By the way, that is a tough situation, and we deal with that every day already because you're going to go into court. Maybe let's say you're divorced. Okay. And now parents are saying, well, they want one thing and one wants the other. It happens all the time and the courts get involved. And the best solution, just like you have an issue with your neighbor, the best solution is if you can work it out with your neighbor or take them to civil court of some sort. Nothing wrong with court necessarily having to to make these decisions. You can have private courts too. So I get it, but you're not describing anything that's not already happening now. So don't say, oh my God, I couldn't imagine being a libertarian because drag shows have young kids going to them in your world. They fucking do right now. Okay.
As a kid, you know, strep throat or whatever, and they gave me that pink stuff that tasted really, really great. It was like strawberry flavored amoxicillin or something. And it cures you. We know antibiotics cure diseases.
Shout out to fungus.
Shout out to fungus. So if I see a parent who's like, I'm going to rub crystals on my kid, I'm like, well, look, I don't like the idea that the government can come in and tell a parent how to raise their kid. That's a big problem. But there's also, oh man, what do you do? We know that antibiotics can cure certain diseases. How do we navigate this when Dr. Fauci says you must do this for your kid, even if it's like, you know, like we're in phase 3 trials and it's only been a couple of years? At that point, you're like, I object. But it's this at the core. The nuance of the situation is different, but it's the same thing. Do I accept the government can intervene when a person defies the science? Man, now I'm watching a kid die of strep throat when I know we could save his life because I don't want someone to be forced to inject their kid over here. I don't have the answer for that.
Well, there's also
you don't have an answer
there's a difference
now.
between amoxicillin and the Fauci-ouchie. You know, we have a lot more long-term data on one of those.
Maybe this is the biggest problem I have. When you have to make little nicknames like that, is it so you can talk to your kids about a vaccine? Come on, grow the... I'm sorry, why does that one trigger me? Fauci, oh man, nothing. It's such a boomer comment. Makes me just cringe.
And the other, but also to your point, can the government do this? There is a historical matter here, which you've pointed out, Luke, which is that throughout all of human history, in every single society, in every single place on planet Earth, the government, by which we mean people having power within political communities, do impose those things. Every single place. Occasionally, anarchists will say, you know, in 8th century Iceland or something. Right. But you know, okay, fine. But everywhere for all of history. Yeah,
well,
right. Yeah.
If you look at government interventions, I mean, again, anarchism doesn't have all the solutions, doesn't have all the answers, and I do believe children should always be protected. Obviously, that should be a common.
No, hold on.
Common sense answer. But hold on.
Wait, if you make a point, I've got to address the point.
Okay, but this is the larger point that I wanted to make here. I'm not finished here. I'm laying down the groundwork for this point.
But you don't agree with that. You don't think kids should always be protected.
It depends on the circumstances and situations. I don't want to be the central controller deciding a lot of these things. A lot of these things will be decided by individuals or communities or families and neighborhoods that will decide for themselves what is right. And I believe...
I'm sorry to break in his rant, but what Tim here says, sometimes the parental rights are fundamental. Those is what's considered with Supreme Court. It's a fundamental right. To terminate their rights is a big deal. Okay. Sometimes what we've just talked about it here, what one person thinks is good, another one thinks is bad. Okay. You have homeopathic, whatever medicine, and you think that's the way to go with your kids. That is something that should really be thought through before you just decide that it's this is the way I deal with it, and so this is how it should be done. Of just terminating parents' rights. I know there's shitty parents out there. There's a lot of those out there. Deal with them all the time, but it's still people are redeemable, and there's still a chance to become that better parent. I've seen it over and over. Done it myself, not to that extreme, but to terminate those rights is a huge deal. Okay. And it shouldn't be taken lightly. So I don't know what that has to do with anything. It felt right at the time.
At the end of the day, that is a better thing that will happen rather than a government coming in and taking a kid and putting him into CPS.
What is CPS?
Look what happens at CPS. Look at how horrible our CPS system is. Yeah. Look at how many kids get hurt inside of the CPS system.
I have a question.
So all I'm saying is at the end of the day, I don't have all the answers and solutions here. No one does. Obviously, there's flaws in every single political argument and political ideology. Yes, obviously. But at the end of the day, individuals should decide for themselves, not central controllers.
So let me ask a simple question. Two circumstances. Government says we will not intervene in what the family decides to do with their child. The family then decides they will sterilize and castrate their kid and give them hormones. Second scenario.
You mean what they're doing right now with
family,
the state protection?
Second scenario.
So we're not
family
talking about libertarian
says
societies.
We will not give this kid hormone therapy and surgery, and the government does intervene.
Right.
Which one's the right or wrong one? Do we say the government should not intervene in the parent's decision as they decide to give their kid what they deem best, a sex change? Or do we stop the government from forcing the sex change because the child wants it and the state deems it to be
taking responsibility away from yourself, taking decisions away from the family, from the community, is to me a recipe for disaster.
So here's
this is what I'm arguing against. That's my main argument.
Do you think...
Not some emotional argument about...
By the way, with the stateless society type of thing, you have Muslim communities, you have Jewish communities that handle these things in-house, okay, already. Now, if someone wants to get divorced and then they can definitely do that and bring the legal system that has more jurisdiction over them. But a lot of these communities, they really feel that they're held to what their mom is doing, what their rabbi is saying, and they will go down that route and make these decisions. So sometimes they may not like it, but they're like, this is what the community has said. And that's a lot of a structure and ways that the people are doing it. So let's not act like it doesn't happen. That's the community. That's the family, right? Isn't that what we want? So
kicking a baby.
It's not
If a mother and father publicly announce that their child of 12 wants to be castrated and injected with hormones, should we just say that's your choice as a parent?
I think that should be pushed back against in many different ways. That's a horrible decision. That's going to hurt the child, and I think there should at least be informed consent and some community involvement.
How can there be informed consent for the kid?
Well, this is the thing. Kids should always be protected. This is where I disagree with a lot of the bigger kind of libertarian and anarchist ideas, especially when they say we got to sell heroin to kids. Obviously, that's the wrong idea. Obviously, that's something that
informed consent for the kid, but he just talked about earlier where we none of us should have individual rights. It should be family. So the kids informed consent per him should have nothing to do with telling the child what it is about. It'd be informing the family. And now the family makes the decision. Okay,
I stand against, and I made clear many times before on this particular show. But when it comes to these important decisions, at the end of the day, I do believe, and I have a lot more faith in a family, in a community, in the neighborhood, and in individuals, rather than the big government that we have now that uses our tax dollars in horrible ways and hurts way more people than the larger ideologies of anarchism, which I believe at the end of the day would lead to less harm reduction.
I just wanted to say that scenario I gave of the parents are doing it and the government doesn't intervene, and the parents don't want it and the government does intervene, exemplifies my point about how laws are based on amorphous morals, analog morals. Like,
that's how the
in which
common law came
circumstance do
about,
we
just
decide
laws.
the government is or isn't right?
Well, and also the interpretation of intervention here is, I think, problematic because the government, by which, and Luke, you keep conflating these things where you say, well, no, I don't like the government, I just like community. Well, the government is the expression of the political community, especially in a notionally self-governing republic.
Especially now with what's happening with the elections? Especially now with the way that they're running things?
Well, certain elections are an expression of that.
We're falling
Maybe
apart.
not Maricopa County.
Especially now with how much debt they put us in, especially now with the threat.
I mean, the national debt is an expression of the political community making choices, absolutely.
I don't really
This is
like
how
what my
I
community
drift
says.
more away from anarchism and libertarianism. I recognize sometimes we want the government to intervene, sometimes we don't. And there's no way to define it other than a judgment.
It just seems
by a
to
trusted
me.
person.
It seems to me the government is always intervening in the sense that we live in a society, we live in a political community. In order to live together in a society, we come up with rules and norms and institutions to mediate the people in that society, the families and the.
But why can't communities do that? Why do you need a government to do that?
That is what a government is. This is the expression of the expression and force of a
I think that's been highly bastardized and highly incorrect with the way the government is now.
You're talking about federal government and large government, right? You're advocating for smaller, localized government.
I'm talking about what essentially is a mafia coming in there and saying, I will impose my will on you because I know what's best for you. I'm against those ideas.
But when we're talking about, let's just use the term political community then, which I think is actually more precise. Within a political community, there is always a way that people are living and being raised. So, for instance, if the mode of education within the political community says that men and women are different and men can't become women and women can't become men, then I guess you're not going to have these kids getting castrated and injected with poison. But is that the government intervening? I just think this idea that the government is active or passive is no, the government just is. The political community just is, and we're always constantly living in a state of standards and norms. And so the question is not this procedural question is, will the government do something or not? The question is just, what is the government doing?
Well, so here's what I see. We have no willingness in American society to set standards and uphold them. There's a bifurcation politically, as we call the multicultural democracy and the constitutional republicanists. That's basically how it's breaking down. But this means that, for the most part, Antifa goes around smashing windows, and there is no willpower or desire to stop them.
Well, we just got an article of 5 of them getting arrested.
We do have this story in Georgia.
People in the school councils. Like
I just want to make one quick point here because I just agree with one basic point here with you saying the government is a representation of community. There's been many scientific studies showing specifically that the will of the people does not impose or change the government. It is special interest in government.
I'm not talking about the
powerful people that do change government and represent government.
Hold on.
And the government is by and large a tool of a lot of powerful people.
You're talking about one specific government versus the concept of government. Different things. But let me pull this story.
Okay, they're going to go to the next. So we'll just keep on cruising through here. Look, Knowles isn't necessarily incorrect about some of these things. My concern is, why are you so gung-ho and digging your heels in to be more and more authoritarian and restrictive instead of like and by the way, he flat out point that out. Libertarianism is a problem to conservatives, and he's going to be talking about it a little bit even more, and which is absurd. you guys that don't want to wield power have been really powerful over my group. So it's an odd take, and I'm confused to some extent by it, because it doesn't make any sense as to why would you not want. I mean, I've always been, even when I was a conservative, I was more leaning to the libertarian side, because, you know, when all else fails, more freedom is better, right? Less government, more freedom. Isn't that what Prager says? Okay, let's keep going. They go back in here just a few minutes later. They can't help.
By the way, not to be too harsh,
you
know, on the libertarian effect on the conservative movement, but a lot of the reason why the libs have become so good, specifically over the last 60 years, at wielding the government in a way that it was not very good actually at before. You saw the beginnings of it with Woodrow Wilson and FDR, but you still had a lot of conservative political power within the government. A lot of the reason why we're not good at it anymore is because the libertarians convinced the conservatives that wielding political power per se is wrong and immoral. And by doing that, we conceded the entire political field, and now the libs run all of the institutions.
The conservatives and Republicans being weak has nothing to do with libertarians. They decided that for themselves. They could
let me see if I could just rewind this one. Do this again. Why is it troublesome here? Okay.
Against the right.
And by the way, not to be too harsh, on the libertarian effect on the conservative movement, but a lot of the reason why the libs have become so good, specifically over the last 60 years, at wielding the government in a way that it was not very good actually at before. You saw the beginnings of it with Woodrow Wilson and FDR, but you still had a lot of conservative political power within the government. A lot of the reason why we're not good at it anymore is because the libertarians convinced the conservatives that wielding political power per se is wrong and immoral. And by doing that, we conceded the entire political field, and now the libs run all of the institutions.
The conservatives and Republicans being weak has nothing to do with libertarians. They decided that for themselves. They capitulated power. They're the ones that went along with a lot of this nonsense. They're the ones that are literally just the Democrats of 10 years ago. Let's be honest. They're implementing the same.
And by the way, we'll get into this, but remember his discussion with Michael Malice. He conceded that absolutely, because Malice pushed back, and so it's crazy that what libertarians are. Can you point me out to where they're doing this? What libertarians are saying libertarians are saying yes, that is their philosophy, not wielding powers per se, but as he said, but where is that actually come about? That's what I'm confused about.
Policies, and if there ever is a political party that hasn't been working for the American people, that actually screwed them over and gave them failed promises,
you're right.
It's the Republican
Luke,
Party.
What's your opinion on redefining marriage? The Obergefell case and now the law that was passed yesterday, the quote-unquote Respect for Marriage Act, radically redefines a fundamental political institution.
I think it's a PR stunt in order to try to galvanize.
I think it was passed unanimously, which means GOP all voted for it. Okay, so okay.
Do you support gay marriage?
I haven't even read the bill.
What about the concept?
I don't believe the government should. I don't think you need permission to marry someone to get a license from the government.
Well, you always have throughout all of human history. So how come now?
People, no, not always. People made bonds and specific contracts with each other without government sometimes as well.
No, that's not true. Marriage has always had a tie either to
religion
or to the religion, which was usually established and had a tie to the state.
I'll make a single point.
By the way, I do know about this. Miscegenation laws, especially for the U.S., didn't even come into account until I wrote it in here, 1920s. Okay, and they were done so you couldn't have interracial marriage. So before that, it was all, and whether it's tied into the state or not, you did not have a marriage license through your state. It was churches. That's how it was determined. So it's not throughout human history. Right? That's not, and that's 1920 is when we started this out. So no, that is not correct. Loving v. something or other. There was a case about that.
Sometimes religion was more powerful than this.
And let me address specifically.
But they're always tied together.
And I'll address specifically, pre-marriage, pre-no-fault divorce was a contract that you could not break. If you entered into a contract with someone, you had a duty and responsibility. And if you wanted to break it, you had to prove to a court that was just reason to do so.
I know, but I think you get problems with 13th Amendment, slavery, and
so marriage meant something. The reason you had the government involved wasn't because they give you permission. It was because you were saying to another person, I give my life to you. I expect your life in return.
And it's a public act.
And it's a public act. And if that person then decided, I'm not going to give you equal, like you're giving me your life, I'm not giving you back. You would have, Your Honor, courts, I need this enforced. And they would say marriage counseling, some kind of relationship counseling. Then no fault divorce came in. And now we're in the period where marriage is basically a date. You're dating someone. There's no enforcement anymore.
In the 40s. That's completely wrong. But I think it is too easy. Well, it's not too easy to get divorced. Trust me, as someone who does it for a living, as far as a divorce attorney, it is not easy to get divorced. It is super easy to get married. Okay. The problem you have is other things, which is out of wedlock, births, living together. Those are the things that are causing more trouble in society. I don't think, as someone who's been divorced and had now a wonderful marriage, I would hate to have been basically under contract a lot. You're going to specific performance. That's what they want to enforce now. This is kind of shitty. Do you believe in, and this is probably where Knowles and maybe Tim are here. They don't believe in contract law, which means you can't, do I need to say it? I know a lot of trads out there are going to be like, yeah, we should have this, but that's only because
which I think is interesting. The reason why libertarianism is so popular right now is because in the 40s, America became a militant authoritarian country. It used to be a liberal republic. And then in 1949, when they created the liberal economic order, they became a military government, and they did it in secret. They didn't want people to know. Kennedy tried to out them to kill whoever.
By the way, if we were more in line with the GOP, was more in line with the libertarians economically, I don't think you would have as many problems in this world as you do. I think Dave Smith wonderfully, and probably disagrees with me on the no-fault divorce stuff. Fine, I get it, but I have a different perspective. But I think if you eliminated the Fed and easy printing of money and those aspects which have really driven down societies, I think you would maybe be a little bit better off. Not everything is about libertarians and social.
Who is they?
So
I don't know.
For 70 years, we've been in a military government. It's like if you played Civilization, they had a revolution of government from liberty.
Deep state.
Yeah, and so what's happening is the anarchists are pushing back, but if you push back too hard, the pendulum goes extreme. You don't want extreme.
That's what statists do, left and right, back and forth, more government, more government, more government. Listen, I grew up in Poland when there was still communism there, right? The Polish people are adverse to communists and to fascists, to extreme left and extreme right. This is essentially the larger ideas that are quantified in anarchism, in my opinion, because they push back a lot of this nonsense that feeds each other and builds on top of each other. And in Poland specifically, when it came to things like marriage, right? If someone would be divorced, if someone would not take care of their child after birthing a child, they would be looked upon as a scumbag. There would be social pressures on that individual for being a scumbag.
No, it's a very Catholic country.
Well, during communism when the Soviet Union had control of Poland, it wasn't mainly the state that was enforcing a lot of these morals. It was the church that had a larger impact on that.
Well, the church was suppressing,
and the church was fighting the state.
But my point here is when I hear from our libertarian friends that the conservatives are.
Before you get done on this other one, I'm going to say something, which is I've seen over the years where the more and more, and you could see this with giving. It used to be they'd show the tax giving of different political parties, and the left was hardly given at all because they believe in social welfare systems. The right would do it, and the churches used to be very, very involved. Matter of fact, if you're reading Rothbard for New Liberty, I think he talks in there, has a whole chapter about social. It's the Mormon Church and how they take care of the community. And he's not a Mormon. He was an atheist, a Jewish atheist, if you can imagine. But he wrote glowingly about the Mormon Church because they had this whole process that goes. I know Catholic Charities was one that used to be as well. The point is you can take care of communities, and that's how it used to be done, giving to your community and taking care of a lot of these things rather than the social order. The government being able to just come in, as Knowles wants them to do, and restrict or give them everything, I guess. Because I can't imagine that you're just saying, oh, I'm only for the government being heavy-handed with trad, family, speech, but then they're going to way back off to all those other libertarian things that I think push a lot, which is finances. He's okay. Is he okay with that? I don't know. Let's continue on.
Actually, the ones who were the Democrats from 10 years ago.
Is it not true?
No, it's not true. The libertarians,
Poland, it wasn't mainly the state that was enforcing a lot of these morals. It was the church that had a larger impact on that.
Well, the church was suppressing,
and the church was fighting the state.
But my point here is when I hear from our libertarian friends that the conservatives are actually the ones who were the Democrats from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Is it not true?
No, it's not true. The libertarians are the ones who are pushing gay marriage, a view so left-wing that Barack Obama didn't even agree with it in 2011. They're the ones pushing drugs. They're the ones pushing open borders. They're the ones pushing all of the breakdown of the family.
Some are, but I'm not.
Some are, yes.
Those are issues that I have very strong stance against.
I think you unwittingly are pushing those things, but I don't think you intend to push those things.
I disagree because I addressed those problems. Specifically, what was the three that you brought
I guess the reason I bring it up is if you ask real conservatives, the real tradies around today, what's your view on marriage? They're going to give you the view of marriage that was held from the beginning of human history until...
By the way, he just pointed out that law, the Defense of Marriage or whatever it was, act that or Defending Marriage Act that was codifying like gay marriage and whatever just passed. As I mentioned, overwhelming. All his people that his trads are putting into Congress, putting into the Senate, They are the ones that voted for this. Okay. So this is what Malice is talking about. You talk about Ted Cruz and some of these others. They're not pushing back against Obergefell, which is the gay marriage decision. They're not making those changes when they got into Congress. They're passing these other things. So I understand that the libertarians, the reason types, do take a lot of pride in what they talk about, like gay freedom and whatnot. These new laws and or lack of them, or whichever you look at it, that they think it's civil rights for that. That's perfectly fine, and I understand Knowles is saying that. But if if libertarians were the ones that were carrying these things in this country, I would love it. But that's not what it is.
If you ask their views on drug laws or on punishing criminals or on immigration enforcement or any of these things, you're going to get the conservative point of view, and it's going to be the drug laws or on punishing criminals or on immigration enforcement or any of these things. You're going to get the conservative point of view,
which
and
is
going to be the
as I
libertarians
described,
and the liberals
10
who
years
agree
behind
on
the
all of those issues in a very, very radical way.
I disagree. I think the ideology is directly opposed to each other. Liberals want more government. Libertarians want less government. But
the end result is the same, as what I'm saying, because it's
not when the liberals use big government in order to impose their will.
But when the libertarians use this fantastical utopian aversion to government to break down the social order and to break everyone down into individuals who are much more easily collectivized, which is what has happened.
Something you said brilliant. I don't know where you got this idea that the base unit of society is a duality. It's a communication between.
Okay, this is where he's just going a little miscegenation laws. Okay, let's see if I have it. Supreme Court finally declared unconstitutional in Loving decision 1967. So all told, miscegenation laws were in effect in the nearly 3 centuries from you couldn't have interracial marriage, and that's why they had Loving v. Virginia basically outlawed that in 1967. Other than that, it was that's when the 1920s they came in with the government had to approve your marriage, which that's what Michael Knowles wants. I don't want the government doing that at all. And by the way, I'm religious, as I mentioned way up front. If you're still following me on this. And so my concern with Obergefell is that churches will be sued because now they are going against your civil rights if you don't want to perform a gay marriage, as an example. And so if you just remove that at all, and it's between you and your church or however you want to do it in your marriage, then that's fine. That's the way I see it. Okay. It's I think we're almost done. They did it after hours, and I don't think it's online anymore. I watched it. It was just as bad as everything else, but let's keep going here.
Well, what do we got? Clint Torres says, Tim, I think you have an interesting perspective regarding
Clint Torres
regarding the death penalty. I also think Michael has an equally interesting yet different perspective that I think is worth talking about. I oppose the death penalty mostly because in order for it to happen, you need people. I'll use the worst example possible. Kamala Harris comes to me and says, trust me, Tim, this guy should die. I'm like, no way, dude. If there's a circumstance where I know definitively that someone is an active threat, then I believe the use of force, which ultimately
including capital punishment.
Capital punishment is still hard for me, but I suppose there is a circumstance where if it was proven to me definitively as a absolute, this person will be a threat to society unless he is dead, then I would be okay. I get it.
So you think that the death penalty is only justified to protect the society,
to stop someone from causing harm and destroying.
But you don't think it would be justified for retribution?
No, I don't believe in retribution.
Really?
Well, I shouldn't say it that way because in certain circumstances I would. I want to be absolute. I think that if you subdue the threat. The only real question beyond that point is, should we extend our labor and resources to providing for someone who has effectively forfeited their right to society?
If you kill them, though, then you're not providing for them.
And the challenge I have there is, in a perfect system, I don't like the idea of killing something that's not a threat. I'd rather put them on a boat and kick them out. But then the problem is they're still a threat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exile doesn't work. So ultimately, in a realistic scenario, my issue with the death penalty is there's no government authority that I will trust that someone deserves to die.
What about deepfakes? They're going to show you video of someone getting killed.
Exactly.
They'll be like,
That's why I'm
I guess the reason I keep trying to hone in on this is if you oppose the death penalty because you don't trust the government, that's one thing. But if you oppose the death penalty, even if you knew the guy did it, for the purposes of retribution, that's different. Because there are 3 purposes of criminal justice: deterrence, rehabilitation, and retribution. And we only ever talk about those first 2 now.
Right.
And so it's deterrence. Well, you've got and what's funny is the opponents of the death penalty always downplay deterrence. They say it doesn't actually deter people, and which is controversial. But also, we don't really enforce the death penalty anymore. So it's like, of course, it's not deterring people. We don't actually enforce it. But
some first transitioned transvestite. What is it? transgender person was just put to death. So what the fuck are you talking about?
But then rehabilitation is the one everyone focuses on.
Dude,
They say
that's what
that the only reason to punish people is to rehabilitate them, bring them back into society. Obviously, the death penalty doesn't do that, though I think it actually does. I think Dr. Johnson is right when he says, depend upon it, sir, when a man knows he's to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. I think it can rehabilitate a man a lot better than maybe 30 years in prison. But furthermore, the primary purpose of the criminal justice system, up to and including capital punishment, but the whole thing, it seems to me, is retribution.
Well, do you think
it's to punish people for committing crimes?
Do you think? But my philosophy is, rehabilitation should be number one.
But if we say that the primary purpose of jails is rehabilitation, then we could all be sent to jails today. I mean, we could all use a little bit of rehabilitation. Right? The reason we're not is because we didn't commit any crimes.
No, but of course, I don't mean that. I'm saying if someone breaks the law, we want to say, okay, we want to eliminate the threat you pose to society and work towards no longer having you be a threat to society.
Okay, that wasn't not too exciting, but I think you can also do restitution over. I mean, not everything is the death penalty. I know that was a death penalty discussion.
Funny, because no one's actually guessing your.
Okay, here we go. This is the last clip we're gonna have from them. This is around 2.5 minutes, and then we're gonna play a clip from Dave Smith and Keith Knight.
Points. So Luke is wrong or Luke is right instead of Michael Knowles is right or wrong.
Because I'm just speaking common sense.
But this is a good one. DS says Luke is Neo dodging those questions at point blank range.
Hey, those are emotionally driven questions based on a lot of times straw men. So okay, excuse me for not engaging in.
Oh, I was just trying to engage in the free marketplace of ideas.
Of course, yeah, but I'm just calling them out as emotionally driven questions.
I just thought we had to, I thought.
By the way, isn't that what Michael said early on, that there's some things you just don't. We discussed, we don't have to do that. Maybe that's what Luke decided. He was done, and it wasn't anything worth discussing. Have you thought about that?
Emotionally driven question.
You picked up specific circumstances with specific, very nuanced cases.
So very lefty.
No, I
don't think my examples were nuanced at all. They were specifically not nuanced to get you to admit that objective good.
You told me if I wanted to kick a baby.
Right, because you said that
obviously I don't want to kick a baby.
So then you're contradicting your previous claim that good and bad are simply arbitrary instead of objectively true.
I'm saying it's arbitrary in the human perspective for one individual to decide.
But you just said it's objectively better to bake the pie for the widow than to kick the baby. So you contradicted.
I can give you a simple physical logical statement about what good and bad are. There's a reason why it is universally morally true that kicking a baby is wrong. If everybody agreed that they could kick babies, humanity would cease to exist. We as humans exist for the human experience. Jeremy Boring said this, and it's a brilliant point. Without humans, what's the point of anything that we do? We do it for humans. We have to be good stewards of the earth.
That's
only for families.
I don't think that's the ultimate purpose of humanity.
Well, to live for the, his point, I thought it was a good point, but it was basically like, if there were no humans, would anything related to humans matter? Of course not. Right. Like, would our laws matter? No, of course not. So that means everything is confined within this space. But ultimately, my point is, if we tolerated things that destroyed humanity, there would be no humanity. Therefore, that is a universal bad.
But we don't only serve humanity, I guess is my point. It seems to me the purpose of life is to know God and to serve him on earth and to enjoy him forever in heaven. And that's the sort of traditional view of things. And for those who are agnostic or atheist, you might be sort of laughing at me right now. But at the very least, let me use kind of new agey language. You know, the purpose of life, man, is to find something outside of yourself and our merely human endeavors and to find something greater and a higher power and, and whatever, bro, or I don't know. So, but it's like, I think most.
Okay, that annoyed me too. That's this Fauci, ouchie, stupid comment. So if you're going to dumb it down and you're going to, this is one thing, by the way, like him or not, his boss, I don't know if it's his boss, but Ben Shapiro, I just fell asleep and woke up last night and I had YouTube had gone through something and it was him and Lex Fridman and they're talking about abortion, some other things, and Lex talking about religious aspects. And Shapiro has talked about many times about making these arguments in a non-religious way so that you can't use that against him. In other words, it's the best way to argue. He already you're not going to convince someone who's not religious. So therefore, Knowles, his way of convincing you for if you're not religious is to mock you. Okay, I'm a little harsh on that.
We're not merely serving our own interests.
But don't you see within the last few decades how a lot of people have been replacing God and using the state as their own religion, as their own kind of cult? I do believe in the power of religion, but when the government intervenes in so much in our lives, people are literally seeing government as their entity, as their God, as what they should worship, of what they should follow.
But all human conflict ultimately is theological, so all political debates are religious as well.
We're about to go.
All interactions are economic.
Yes, we're about to go to members only. So let me read one more really good super chat. Carlo Magno says, Tim, I don't believe in capital punishment unless you trespass in my property pool. Well, it's a...
Okay. Last one we're going to do here. People, thank you. If you're still with me, maybe next time we should have done this live. Okay. I'm bringing this one up because he talked about the communist stuff and I thought it was a good thing. Now, Dave Smith sets up this question He talks for about 3 minutes to set up this question. But I think Keith Knight, and by the way, easy. I'm not ready. Settle down. Sometimes these things don't quite work. Do I have the book here? I don't know where it's at. I have Keith Knight's book though. So I don't know where it's at, but he's going to talk about it here. And it's the voluntarist handbook. That's what it is. And Keith does a great job kind of steel manning some of these things and making actual good arguments. And I think it was probably better than me. I mean, like, look, I hear Knowles argues, he debates, he's got a big platform. He does a very good job of this. I'm sure I suck at it. It's just frustrating to see him come on and try to make a victim out of the GOP. Is suddenly he wants to say that they're poor little things, that they've been pussy whipped by the Libertarian Party, which is absurd on its face. And that's why I played the initial thing with Malice. So you can see that he's had these arguments presented to him before. He's actually agreed with them. And then he comes on here and he's just, I don't know if it's a new way he's going, something he's just newly thought about, but it's absurd. Okay. So completely absurd to think that the GOP, but I mean, Thomas Massey, the only one to stand up against any of the people, because it's more than economic. Economics makes a huge deal in everyone's lives. Okay. So yes, you have drag queens. If we're able to argue about drag queen story hour, it means that everything else is going well. Perhaps, I don't know. Those are things that they're taking charge as well. And people are pushing back against them. It's good to have societal norms, but I can't understand where we just take ownership. And if the GOP sucks, then say the GOP sucks and then don't get behind them. But when you're saying there's no, you talk to all these trads and they're going to be for conservative marriage and whatnot. Where are you at? What are you doing about it?
We can here, because obviously the book lays out from many different angles by many different brilliant thinkers, arguments and reasoning for arriving at this conclusion that we ought to live in a voluntarist society, or as close to it as we can possibly get. So let's try to take on some of the criticisms of voluntarism as best we can. Let's try our best to steelman them and then respond to them. So the first one that I thought of was the one that you mentioned at the top, which is a good one to start with, because you kind of talked about this is what inspired you to write the book after Michael Malice's book, where you're like, well, look, there are these anarchists, left-wing anarchists. Some identify as anarcho-communists, anarcho-syndicalists, different forms of left-wing anarchists, who argue that me and you are not really anarchists. And if I could make their argument as strong as I can for them, I will attempt to. And there is a little kernel maybe of truth in how where these words originate from, right? So anarchy means without rulers, and hierarchy is also in the form archy, with rulers at the top, right? So where there is an order of rulers. So they'll say, look, if you're not against hierarchy, then you're really not against rulers. And therefore, you people who believe that someone could be the business owner and someone could be the business worker and someone could be, you're really not an anarchist, even though you're against the state. In some sense, you're not really an anarchist because you don't believe in ultimately kind of like achieving these egalitarian ends. So I don't know, is there a better way to steelman the argument, or what would you say? They'll say you're not really, if you believe in landlord and tenant, then that's still you're not truly an anarchist. Or if you believe in employer and employee, this person still has this ability to say, well, you do this or you lose your job. And if you lose your job, you're going to be destitute and blah, blah, blah. But first off, is there a better way to steelman that argument? Or if not, what would your response to it be?
That's a pretty good way to steelman, because we've heard it so often. Maybe I would say the anarcho-capitalist does not allow the individual to reach their full creative potential because a number of institutional barriers that exist as a result of previous aggression currently exist in society today. Therefore, things like employers, which exist because of a power differential, do not allow individuals to live life unruled. Therefore, anarcho-capitalists are not anarchists. That's all bullshit. So on page 3, I have a list of terms, just because a wise man once told me that so many disagreements come down to different definitions of the same term. So if you think capitalism is just people being greedy for money, I would be totally against capitalism. But how on earth is it greedy to want money voluntarily, but the socialist who wants to take money by force and threatening to cage you, well, that's not greedy at all. That's just caring about people. So when I define anarchy, on page 3 in the terms section. I say from the Greek prefix an, meaning without or in the absence of, and the Greek noun archon, master.
He's doing a great job, but I want to say this before I forget, because I've been drinking a little bit and it might actually happen. The Michael Knowles just blows my mind, because you could be a minarchist, right? What about minarchy would he really have? Minarchy is almost to the extent of constitutional republic government or conservative type of thing. There's a lot of overflow and mix of those two, right? And I mean, you saw Austin Peterson, that's what he was, and then he was going to the other. Anyway, so there's a lot of mix of that. Why are you fighting so hard against that? It reminds me of, so growing up, I was part of the church. My church never took a strong stance on abortion. Okay, they're just like abstinence, right? Blah blah. Which means I didn't have strong feelings one way or another. So it is always weird, though. Even with that, it's just like, I mean, I'm pro-life now, but there's pro-life, and then there's kind of like just the people that are kind of in the middle there. Whatever. It's those ones that push so hard on the other side that are gross. They're like, I'm celebrating my abortions, and those. It's just like, it is. You do understand that is a baby, right? At some point, if you let it go to full birth, it's not going to be a VW bug. It's going to be a child. So it's a little odd that you celebrate it so vociferously, which is what was odd about Michael Knowles pushing back so hard against Luke. It's like he just wants so bad. He's pissed off. 10 years. The driving the speed limit the conservatives are driving the speed limit towards progressivism, and he's upset about that. He wants to speed down the Autobahn as fast as he can. So anyway, back to these guys.
Ruler. Anarchy does not mean without rules. It literally means without rulers, without masters. So the difference between someone heavily influencing you and someone being a ruler is simply your consent. This differentiates trade from theft, slavery from work, and kidnapping from hanging out with someone at their house for an extended period of time. So if a man works and the woman stays at home, she would be exploiting his labor, because she's not working. She's just taking a portion of his income and spending it. And obviously college, like I mentioned previously. Anytime someone gives charity, well, that person didn't work and they're not obeying the labor theory of value. So charity has to be outlawed. Obviously, Social Security needs to be abolished, and any sort of voluntary retirement program, well, that needs to go. But as far as are we not really anarchists, I think I have addressed that as much as I can in my opening statement. Simply, we believe individuals have the right to contract. The anarcho-communist does not. So even though they were first, absolutely historically accurate, they were first. Imagine if the earliest mathematicians believed 3 + 3 = 55. They would have been first, but they would not have been mathematically correct. So yes, the earliest anarchists did believe that you didn't have the right to make voluntary exchanges. Look, the bottom line is you don't know what's best for 7 billion strangers. I mean, look at all of the inequality that exists, I don't know, everywhere. In the NBA, I'm not nearly as good as the NBA, as anyone in the NBA. And not only that, within the NBA, less than 1% of NBA players sell 99% of the jerseys. It's like 5 or 6 guys sell 99%. That's inequality. This is referred to as the iron law of oligarchy. The original example that's given by James Burnham in The Machiavellians is, all right, so you're sick of the bourgeoisie, these owners, horrible people. So you are going to start a union where you allow the proletariat to rise up and be an equal force against this bourgeoisie. Nothing anti-libertarian about that. You can certainly do that. You have the right to strike. The alternative is forced labor, which is slavery, which violates the non-aggression principle. So people in a union will voluntarily come together. However, not everyone's going to come to the union meeting. Not everyone's going to talk at the union meeting. Not everyone is going to be as persuasive as other people at the union meeting. So you end up with Jimmy Hoffa and his 5 friends controlling the union. This is called the iron law of oligarchy. So the most democratic people on the planet, Bernie Sanders and AOC, they have more institutional power than 99.9% of their supporters ever will. Because anytime people organize, anytime people organize, there's going to be some people who are better than others, and it just makes economic sense for you to delegate the cost of spreading the message to that person. Iron law of oligarchy refutes anarcho-communism on both moral and practical grounds.
I think.
Okay, and we're going to leave it there because I think that was brilliantly said. Go check out Keith Knight. Don't try it on anyone. Don't try it on anyone. I think that's what it is. Or anybody. Especially that episode, he just put it back out. That was about a year ago. He was on with Dave Smith, and he put it out himself. Definitely, I just listened to it again today, and I was just floored again. I've had Keith on our show, so check that out. I reviewed his show. Great stuff there. I've had Dave Smith on our show as well. So I thought that was a really good little synopsis way to finish it, which is to show that I don't understand this communism, anarchist right and cap being two sides of the same coin, unless you're saying that that's like the spectrum and you have freedom on one side, authoritarianism on the other side, and Michael Knowles is the actual coin going through the middle. I don't know if that's what it is, but it was interesting. So I hope you enjoyed this one. This was a long one. Hope you stuck in with me. It was very important to get through this because we had to do that. We had to break all this down. I'm not a big fan. Knowles have bothered me. Okay. And I know he's a smart guy and I would probably I wouldn't smoke a cigar with him because I don't do that because I'm a healthy person, but I would probably have a drink with him, talk to him, and I'd probably get along because I look very similar. I'm not Catholic, but I look very similar, white, waspy. So that's just, things we have in common. Anyway, what do we have going up? I need to get connected with Andy again. That little mother effer. He's been in Nashville. I don't know what he's doing. Things seem to be going well. But I do have a few other items in the work. We're gonna get a KillPodcast going here coming up shortly. Okay, Michael Knowles on with TimCast. I'll put those links in there. I'll put the Michael Malice ones in there as well, and then I will also put links to the Keith Knight and what's his name? Dave Smith. Other than that, it's been episode 78. Like, subscribe, check us out everywhere. We're on Rumble. Please go subscribe over there too. We'll do multiple so we can at least stream live everywhere in case we get canned. We're on Odyssey. We're on Locals. Join us there. Check out my Substack. I put everything in there. I put out an episode of this on Substack as well. It's just, mirrored it out there, but I have a lot of the details there. So if you need to, and you click on here and you want to go find my Substack, that's where you're going to find most of the show notes, as Tom Woods would say. And other than that, Happy New Year, everybody. Late.
Okay, I'm leaving now. Bye, guys.
But she's back.
And now.
Chick-fil-A is completely overrated. It's not that good. I prefer Zaxby's. I prefer Popeyes.
Takes a tough man to make a tender forecast, Nick. I guess that's me. Keep fucking that chicken.
Should I vote for Dick Cheney on the Libertarian Party? Do I have an obligation to vote for Dick Cheney?
I would say so.
Yes.
Did it work for those people?
No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us.
That one dude was like, not a podcast, I can't find it anywhere, and they don't have video.
Oh, yeah, Peter Janke, yeah.
Yeah, I blocked him.
I'll do it. If he unblocks me, I'll...
He'll buy your shirt if you unblock him, Bert.
He's a wigger.
Yeah, nothing cooler than a 49-year-old wigger.
Like,
I just started live streaming. Cut me some slack. I'm pretty high tech for a boomer. But anyways,
boomer.